Hi guys, it's Taylor here, and I did my movement analysis on a tripod headstand. So, if you don't know what a tripod headstand is, it is, as you can see in the slides there, a yoga position. One that's definitely a little more advanced than some of the others you may have seen in the past, but anyway, it's a great way to build strength, flexibility, and balance. Can also promote, mental clarity and emotional awareness, as all yoga can. The technical term is Salamaba Shirshasana. Um, there are a couple different ways to do this exercise, but the one that I chose is the second variation of it, and that is the tripod headstand. So the specific strength that it builds is going to be in your shoulder, arm, and core muscles. It's also been said to help reduce fluid buildup in your lower extremities, improve blood flow to your head and scalp, and also stimulate the flow of the lymphatic system. So, in order to complete this exercise, it requires a few steps. It's not something that you just want to go and jump straight onto your head. You probably are going to injure yourself. So, to start off, you can see in this picture here, you're going to end up kind of crouching down into a squat so you can have, a little closer orientation to the next steps. Next is going to be hand placement. It's important that you place your hands probably 8 inches to a foot in front of your feet. It's going to be right about at shoulder width, as your feet will as well. And then from there, you're going to have to place your head down to provide that third place of support. And the next step is going to be actually bringing your lower extremities over the top of that support, that triforce of support. And as you can see in like the upper right hand corner of this picture, she's demonstrating a very good form of stabilizing yourself before you then go to the bottom right hand corner there, which is to lengthen your entire lower extremities so that you can point your toes to the sky. So some unique characteristics about this exercise, or as in all sorts of yoga, are the breathing patterns that are used. It's always good to maintain relatively smooth breathing, but the best way to establish the best breathing is to always exhale on movements that require more effort and then inhale on ones that do not. So for more of your eccentric movements, that would be where you would inhale, and your concentric movements is when you would exhale. It's also important to use methodical movement control since you are putting a lot of strain on your head and neck and trunk areas. Those are vulnerable to injuries, so being wary of how hard you're pressing yourself and making sure that you have a good stable base before you start is going to keep you from causing any injury, and also just make the exercise easier overall. Lastly, we're upside down when we do this, so it obviously is something that we don't feel often. I mean, unless you go and swing on monkey bars and hang upside down. Maybe guess when I was a kid I used to do that, but these days I don't really have time. But that's going to definitely cause your body to feel a different unique sense than you would probably typically be used to. So moving into the actual analysis of this activity, of this movement, as I said, the first step is going to be crouching to a squat. So there's a variety of different movements that happen in order for that to be achieved. To start off is hip flexion. This is going to be eccentric movement as you're moving down towards the ground. It requires roughly 100 degrees of range of motion. The agonists in this sense are going to be the biceps femoris, the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, and the gluteus maximus. Your antagonists are going to be your flexors. Since this is eccentric, it's the opposite. So you're going to have your rectus femoris, iliopsoas, and pectineus. Another one is knee flexion, since we're getting down into a very deep squat. And that's going to also be eccentric with gravity, 135 degrees range of motion, pretty much your full range of motion because you're basically topping out there as you sit down on your calves. Agonists are rectus femoris and your vastus medialis, intermedius, lateralis, and your antagonists are the biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. Also utilizes dorsiflexion. You'll end up kind of pointing your toes a little bit as you sit in. You'll be kind of resting on the balls of your feet. Also eccentric, as gravity is allowing that to happen. You'll require pretty much your full range, whatever that might be. The normal functional level of that is 15 degrees. Agonists are going to be your gastrocnemius and soleus. Antagonists are your tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum longus. And then also there will be a slight bit of external rotation in order to allow for your arms to go in between your legs, which is the next step. This is a concentric movement requiring about 25 degrees of range of motion. Agonists are, long list, piriformis, gemellus, superior and inferior, external and internal obturators, your gluteus maximus, and your quadratus femoris. And then your antagonists are going to be your internal rotators there, gluteus minimus and adductor magnus. On to the next step, or hand placement. So in order to put our hands into the proper position, 8 inches to a foot in front of us, is going to require concentric shoulder flexion of 75 degrees. Agonists are anterior deltoid, pectoralis major, the clavicular portion, and your antagonists are the latissimus dorsi, posterior deltoid, and teres major, and also involved there is a synergist of your coracobrachialis. We also have to have our hands facing down, so that is pronation. This is going to be with gravity, eccentric, full pronation, 80 to 90 degrees, preferably 90. And in this case, agonists are biceps brachii and the supinator, and your antagonists are your pronator teres and your pronator quadratus. Next is finger and thumb abduction. It is ideal if you have a wide base of support on each hand, so to have your fingers spread allows you to have more. So that'll be concentric. 25 degrees on your fingers, 50 degrees on your thumb. The agonists for the finger are your dorsal interossei and abductor digiti minimi, since we're abducting. Antagonists are the palmar interossei for your fingers, and then for your thumb, it's going to be the abductor pollicis longus and brevis for your agonists, and antagonists are your adductor pollicis. And then lastly, wrist extension. Since we are putting a lot of weight down onto our hands, obviously it's going to be like a push-up sort of position. So it'll be concentric, away from gravity, 70 degrees. And agonists are extensor carpi ulnaris and your extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. Antagonists are the flexor carpi radialis and ulnaris. Next, for head placement, requires neck flexion, elbow flexion, and thoracic lumbar trunk flexion. For neck flexion, all these are eccentric. For neck flexions, it's going to be 35 degrees. Agonists are the splenius capitis, splenius cervicis, erector spinae, transverso spinalis, and interspinalis. Antagonist is just the sternocleidomastoid. For elbow flexion, it only doesn't require full flexion. It's roughly 60 degrees. As you could see if you were to go back in this presentation, and the woman's arms, they aren't fully flexed. They're going to just be enough to kind of support the knees on top to then put up your feet later. Agonists are the triceps and anconeus, antagonists, bicep brachii and brachialis and brachioradialis. For the thoracic and lumbar trunk flexion, it's about 45 degrees, just enough to get your head on the ground and create that support. Agonists are the erector spinae, transverso spinalis, and interspinalis, and the antagonists are the internal and external obliques, and of course your rectus abdominis. Next here is your weight shift over the base of support. So this is going to be where your feet finally come off the ground, and you are now putting all of the weight on both hands and your head. This is basically moving backwards from the last movement with the addition of isometric contractions on your shoulder and elbows. So for the movement of the torso, it'll be neck and neck. It'll be concentric neck extension from 35 degrees back to 0. I could repeat all of the agonists and antagonists, but it's going to be the same as it was in the previous step, because as we did neck flexion eccentrically, the concentric muscles are the same agonists and antagonists wise in this situation. And the same goes for the thoracic and lumbar trunk extension. If you're eccentrically flexing, to concentrically extend is going to require the same muscle groups in the same categories. And this is just going to be from, like I said, 45 degrees before to back to 0. And in terms of the shoulder flexion and elbow extension, these muscles were already given in step 2. And this will be isometric, so you'll just be holding that position. And next. Step 5, lengthening the torso and lower extremities. This is just, again, kind of bringing everything back to where we started, with the main difference being that we're upside down now and we're supporting ourselves on our head and our hands. So internal hip rotation is going to be occurring. This is concentric. It's going to go from the 25 degrees that we established from external rotation back to 0. Your agonists, which we already kind of mentioned before, but it's opposite, is the gluteus minimus and adductor magnus. And then your antagonists are those external rotators of the piriformis, gemellus superior and inferior, external and internal obturators, gluteus maximus, and quadratus femoris. For your hip extension, it's going to be concentric this time, but as we did hip flexion eccentrically, it's going to be the same muscles. It's going from 100 degrees back to 0. So those were just outlined previously. And then for knee extension, also, I'm sorry, I messed up on my PowerPoint. It should say same as in step 1. I'd like to just make a little note of that. For knee extension, concentric, same as with hip extension. It's going to be the same exact agonists and antagonists as in step 1. For eccentric knee flexion, but this is concentric because we're going against gravity up towards the sky, and you're going from that 135 degrees back to 0. Plantar flexion, it's going to be concentric as well. It's to 50 degrees of plantar flexion, but you're probably starting from a little bit of dorsiflexion. So I guess overall it would be like 6 degrees range of motion, but you're coming through neutral. And your agonists and antagonists, like I said, are going to, like the other two, are going to be the same as they were in step 1 for the eccentric activity of dorsiflexing. So in terms of impairment and adaptation, I figured that an impairment that would keep you from doing this activity, I mean, there's plenty that would definitely keep you from doing this. So, I mean, because it is a little bit more advanced, but the one that I thought would be relevant is maybe someone has carpal tunnel or someone just whatever that limits the wrist extension. I know my mom's suffers from that a little bit, so using this kind of push-up bar sort of thing would allow them to have a neutral wrist position so that they could establish that base of support and put those where they needed to go. And then when they go up into their headstand, they would be able to, providing that they have adequate grip strength, they would be able to push up and get into that position and, yeah, do their tripod headstand. So anyway, that is my activity analysis. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And yeah, guys, be safe out there. Practice some social distancing. Peace out.